I'm Michael Cross, co-founder of Athlete Viewpoint, and I'm joined today by Phil Esten from the University of St. Thomas and Erin McDermott from the University of Chicago. And today we're going to be talking about career advancement, and specifically the decision to move from being the number 2 person in a Division I athletic department to becoming the athletic director in a Division III athletic department. So I'm going to start out by asking, tell us about the personal and professional motivations that you had in making the decision to move from the number 2 opportunity to be the leader of your own show.
So I guess I'll start. I did this a longer ago time than Phil did. This is my 6th year at the University of Chicago. So thinking back to that decision-making process, I knew at that point in my career, being at Princeton, the experiences I had had, I'd been there for 13 years, that it was time to go on and be an athletic director. And I was very intentional about the kind of place I wanted to be. I had been in the Ivy League beyond Princeton. I'd been at Columbia. I was a student athlete myself at Hofstra, and very much came from a background of being a student, always being education first, and knowing that that philosophical alignment needed to be at a place that also had that focus. So in the idea of Division I versus Division III, it wasn't so much about that for me as it was the place, and thinking about the institutions that I was interested in that would have that philosophical alignment. And so University of Chicago for me presented that. I knew if I went to Division III, I wanted to be at a prestigious school like I had been in Division I, and a place that we could be pretty competitive like I had experienced at Princeton, since that was a big part of, I thought, the experience for the student athletes for me. So that was really the professional thinking, was it's about the likeness of the place and that philosophical fit more than necessarily the division. Personally, I wanted to live in a more metropolitan area, and so Chicago certainly presented that. Princeton's a great place, but it had limitations as far as that was concerned. So that was really the personal part for me, even though I was taking me away from family even more. The ability to live in such a dynamic, robust city was attractive.
You know, I'd say for us, it started with the fact that St. Thomas is my alma mater. And, you know, I'm not so sure that we would have gotten very far down the road if it weren't for the fact that both my wife, Danny, and I had gone to and graduated from the University of St. Thomas a long time ago. But still a place that was very near and dear to us. We had stayed engaged with the university for a long time, and I'd gotten to know President Sullivan a little bit over the last couple of years. And she was somebody who's a very dynamic leader, someone who was inspiring to us. And so that conversation started with the fact that it was our alma mater. And so I think that's both personal and professional. There's a mix, a blend between the two there. Secondly, in this business, I think that you want to get as close to the mission as you can get. The more you can get your hands on the mission and kind of see and live and feel that impact is really important to me anyway. And so Danny and I really kind of tried to unpeel or unpack what are the key things that are important to us as we're making that decision. And the opportunity to get as close to that mission, both institutionally and in the athletic department, was important to us. And it's something we felt great about in St. Paul at St. Thomas. And then lastly, of course, it's closer to home for us. And so I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Danny grew up in southern Minnesota, and we still have family and friends. And while we've developed great relationships and friendships that I think will be lifelong friendships at Penn State and at Cal before that and other places, this was a place where we were able to get back closer to a strong core network of family and friends. And so those were really the driving motivations and factors behind the decision.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you both mentioned some things about the things you were seeking. How did you assess the fit? Who did you consult with? How did you figure out this makes sense? Because and Phil, in your case, you're an alum, so you know what that environment is like better, but there's things that change over time. And in your case, you're moving halfway across the country to a new city. So what did you go through, and how did you assess those types of things to make sure it was what you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, for me, I spent a lot of time, first of all, kind of assessing this with Danny, and what is it that we want it to look like for our family? And a couple questions we always ask ourselves as we make decisions professionally and personally is, number one is, is this a place where we can see ourselves for the rest of our lives? Can we see our kids going to high school in this community? Can we see ourselves retiring in this community? And so that was an important conversation for us. And of course, we felt like this was a place we could be at for a very long time. And kind of once you get through that gate, you get to the second gate, which is if not, though, what kind of opportunities might it present down the road? And we certainly feel as if the trajectory of the University of St. Thomas was something that we felt strong about. Again, President Sullivan's vision for the university and athletics' role with that vision was important to us. So really that first consultation was just, can we get beyond or get to a place where we feel good about St. Thomas? But then I'd say, Joel Maturi was somebody who I really consulted a lot with. He and I have stayed in touch since I worked for him at the University of Minnesota. Sandy Barber was a great resource, our athletic director at Penn State. And just, again, really trying to assess what is important personally. And I think one of the things that I've really found, it's hard to do, but when you're honest with yourself about what's important, when you're really truly honest with yourself, and you might not always like the answer when you're trying to unpack some of this stuff, but when you're honest with yourself about your personal career trajectory, your personal career goals, what's important to you, that might change over time. Those were some things that helped us get to that decision.
So for me, you're right. I had very little familiarity with the city, with even the school. I think I knew it was a good school, but being from Massachusetts and a bit of a Northeast, probably education snob as we can be as far as where the good schools are, I didn't know a whole lot about the University of Chicago getting into this. And I think what I did know was it was a very good school. My perception was that it was not a place that was very supportive of athletics, that the moniker tagged to that school for years, and sorry for anyone listening from the University of Chicago, because they're trying to not be identified by this anymore, but the place where fun goes to die. That was not an attractive tagline for me. So I actually had to do a lot of searching to learn more and really make sure this was a place that there would be fit and philosophical alignment. I definitely understood it would not be a place, and I didn't expect it to be a place that athletics would be the driver of the institution. That was not where I was coming from, but just at least a place that we could be successful because it's part of the holistic educational experience and something that for especially varsity student athletes is such a significant part of their education. So that I had to reach out to really other people in the UAA, the University Athletic Association, with the conference that University of Chicago is in, which is a very different kind of Division III alignment. So talked with George Vanderswag, who we've known for a long time, who's the AD at Rochester. Susan Bassett at the time was at Carnegie Mellon, and she was the one who kind of even let me know that the position was out there originally. So it was touching base with some people that had more context for the place and within the conference than I really did at the time to make me feel like, okay, there's enough good here that, it seems like it fits those things that I felt were important to me. Gary Welters for sure was someone, of course, that I had many conversations with, and he was one who would sometimes tease the University of Chicago for that reason, the place where fun goes to die. So you want Gary's blessing in anything that you're doing, and so that was important to get, and he was definitely full force behind me. So Carolyn McGovern, I think at the Ivy League office, has been someone who's helpful. Jackie Blackett, who was my first boss at Columbia, who had experience at Rochester. So there were, certainly lots of people to pull on, which is important in what we do, just having that network out there. And certainly some people that I maybe know as well, but knew the place better, that I got a lot of great information and knew that it was a good fit.
So when you talk about fit, we all have bosses. How did you assess the working relationship you'd have with your president and within the institutional context? So, did Chicago decide they wanted to have more fun and hired Erin McDermott, which I can certainly understand, or did they? How did you ultimately come to the decision that this will be a good working relationship and productive toward the institutional goals and your goals?
Yeah, well, a little bit. I think hiring me was a little bit of that acknowledgement. The University of Chicago was going through very much a transformational stage, still is, of a growing undergraduate student body, of a new vice president for enrollment who was tasked and also very eager to have a broader base of students coming to the University of Chicago. No longer did they want to be the really good school in Chicago that was very Midwestern focused and basically down the road from Northwestern. Wanted to be known as a destination place for phenomenal students across the country and internationally. And so there was a lot of growth, a lot of interest in growing student resources, and the kinds of amenities around students that were going to make that a more fun place to be. So it was an exciting time to go to the University of Chicago in this transformational phase and in this presidential leadership that really was more focused on the undergraduate experience, understanding obviously the excellence of the graduate schools at the University of Chicago would not, be sacrificed. But yes, I think that was certainly a draw for me, is knowing that this place was kind of on the move and really intentional about wanting to build more of that experience for students there.
For me, it's a little bit different. I've known Dr. Sullivan since she started at the University of St. Thomas about 5 years ago. And I don't recall exactly how we connected initially, but we've stayed in touch over the last 5 years and have been able to observe, not just from kind of an outside vantage point, but having a little bit of a dialogue with Dr. Sullivan over the last 5 years, what her vision is and how that's transformed some of the expectations at the University of St. Thomas. And again, when you think about what her vision is and the role that athletics can play in that vision, taking the University of St. Thomas as a really good regional institution in a lot of different disciplines, and how do we grow that reach a little further regionally, if not even a little bit nationally, and what role can athletics play in that, is something that was exciting for me. And again, getting really hands-on, not just with the mission in athletics, but also having an opportunity to impact that mission across campus as well. And looking at the blended role between the academic experience and the athletic experience was something that I feel strongly about. It aligned really well with my personal core values, Danny's and my core values, and then also now the institutional core values. And so it actually was a little bit different for me in that I had known Dr. Sullivan for a long time. And so that conversation, we had a head start on that conversation as we were thinking about what that might look like moving into the athletic director position.
So when you think about, you get the opportunity, it's offered to you, for your own opportunities to be at a place that you think fits for yourself, there's a lot of pieces that work there, but the institutions you're at also have to operate in a broader context and across Division III within your own conferences. So what things have you encountered related to your move from Division I to Division III that maybe are subtle or overt, that are misperceptions or accurate perceptions about the decision you've made to be at a place that has 37 teams and 1,000 athletes at Princeton, or 31 teams and 800 athletes at Penn State, to running your own shop and the differences that might exist there?
So probably different for me than Phil, because I think the misperception for me was, I got that question a lot in my first year, 2 years at Chicago as well. Tell me about that move from D1 to D3 and what was that like? For me, it was in so many ways seamless, because I was at Princeton in the Ivy League, going to the University of Chicago and the University Athletic Association. There was way more similar than different. And so I would actually say, it's very different. I would guess it's very different than coming from a Big Ten institution to a Division III school, and maybe even a different kind of Division III school, smaller liberal arts college, versus a major research institution to another major research institution. So the misperception for me was really more that people just assumed it would be very different. And I think given that the Ivy League and Division III, no athletic scholarships, you are really surrounded by very similar kinds of students, coaches, the way we have to recruit is very similar. The experience that the students are having in a rigorous academic environment, very similar. So I think for me it was more, again, this myth that, oh, there must be huge differences, and really there weren't. The only thing I would say that probably was a change, and again, it's potentially more institutional than it is Division I versus Division III. But I think in Division III, it's a younger phenomenon, is in this whole category of fundraising and really cultivating alumni, and that's just a given in Division I and very much been part of the operation for a long time. And in Division III, it's really now become much more introduced into the equation. So cultivating alums and kind of making people aware that athletics was a place that they could give their donative dollars, and what kinds of things we could do with that was an educational process that we are still building. But winning hearts and minds in that way was probably one of those differences and challenges going from one to the other.
Got it.
So I've been on campus all of 9 days, and so I might say I'm still in the honeymoon phase a little bit, and so haven't been presented with that as much. If you get back to the core of what we do, the impact that we have on our student athletes, I really don't think there is any difference. There's the old saying that all politics are local, and so it's kind of relative. The budgets obviously are different, the resources are different, but so too are the expectations in a certain regard, and the way that you spend those resources or kind of distribute and allocate those resources. And so when you start to take some of the things that happen at the Division I level that don't necessarily happen at the Division III level, so you've got scholarships where there's a big chunk in a budget that you don't necessarily need. You've got national, if not international, recruiting, which is something that is different, at the Division III level for us anyway. Travel budgets look a little bit different, and so when you start to pull some of that back, again, it's all relative. Ultimately, I'd say the one thing that I think I've grabbed onto a little bit in just the couple of weeks that I've been at St. Thomas is that I think our coaches at Division III and I know at St. Thomas are every bit as good and as sound in X's and O's and building team and thinking about culture. But the one thing that they have that maybe I didn't see as much at the Division III level is this entrepreneurial spirit, in that they're going out to find additional resources either for themselves or their coaching staffs or their programs. That doesn't happen at the Division I level either, because there's not the time or the need to do that kind of thing. And so, our coaches are spread pretty thin in that they're asked to do some things beyond their coaching duties within the athletic department, which I think they really enjoy. Most of them, right? And but then also this entrepreneurial approach to how else can we provide resources for our program and for our assistant coaches and for our families, et cetera. And so that's been kind of fun for me to get to understand and learn a little bit about what that looks like at the Division III level. And I think it's a great model. And some of these coaches may have opportunities or be every well as prepared to coach in some other conference or at some other school or at some other division, but they've chosen this because it aligns well with their personal philosophies and their personal values, and they're able to do some of these things outside of just the day-to-day coaching responsibilities that excite them.
Sure. So when you've said you've been there all of 9 days,
sure.
And you're following an athletic director who was there for quite a while, obviously had a huge impact on the success of the program and the people who are there. How did you go about understanding what you'd be walking into and assessing the types of imprint and stamp you want to put on the department while not upsetting the great parts about the culture that they already have, obviously?
Steve Fritz is currently the athletic director, the outgoing athletic director, has been on campus for more than 5 decades in different capacities as a student athlete, as a coach. He was a very successful men's basketball coach on campus, and now obviously for 25, 26 years has been a successful administrator. And so he's left a legacy at St. Thomas, and that would be difficult if you think about filling that or stepping into those shoes. First of all, he's a very large man. His shoes are huge to fill, both literally and figuratively. And so I certainly don't intend to do that. I think the only way you can look at that for me is how do we take the core values and standards and principles and the integrity in which he kind of led things, and used that as the foundation for success as we look into the future. I think that's a really important piece. Steve is going to hang out for a couple of months and stay around the athletic department for several months, and I think that's great from a transition standpoint. And I'm excited about that. It gives me an opportunity to bounce some things off of him, learn some historical perspective that I wouldn't otherwise maybe have the opportunity to learn. Coaches and staff still have the opportunity to engage with Steve, which I think is really important because he is such an institution at the institution. The other thing that I did, Mike, as you know, is a survey of both coaches and staff and assistant coaches, et cetera, just to kind of gain some perspective on what they're thinking, what things are going really well, what things might be opportunities to look at, to shift down the road, and then some qualitative stuff and some quantitative stuff, and you can kind of package that all together. And as you look at it, themes start to emerge a little bit, and there might be themes around brand, there might be themes around identity, might be themes around certain opportunities. One of the questions, two questions we asked, one was, if everything's going to stay the same, but we could change one thing, what would it be? And conversely, if everything was going to change, but there was one thing that you could keep, what would it be? And that was really telling to me around the things that are important to the people. Unfortunately, there was some commonalities in the answers. I didn't ask 84 people and get 84 different answers, and so that certainly helps set kind of the foundation and a benchmark for how we approach things moving forward.
Got it. And Erin, in your environment, we talked a little bit before starting this about the history at the University of Chicago. One of the great athletic powers in the early days of the NCAA, we talked about Jay Berwanger and 1935 Heisman Trophy that sits in your administration building. And what have you done to take Chicago? And you talked about the fun aspect, but it's clear in the time that you've been there that the athletic profile of the department and the programs has gone up, and you're standing within the NACDA Athletic Directors Cup certainly is right at the top of the charts. What particular things have you done to implement that and move those types of things along at a place where there are some challenges? And they may not be excited about it.
Right. I think a lot is what Phil was talking about with that initial assessment. I didn't have the fortune of using the survey. That would be great to have, but I did my own, surveying across in the similar way and found those common things that it seemed like we were deficient or we could be doing better, and started to chip away at those things. So with our coaching support, just didn't seem like we were where we needed to be against our peers with the kind of coaching support that we had, and was able to do that pretty quickly, which is huge in moving that kind of a needle, because the student athletes are getting more attention in what they're doing, but also the recruiting efforts that you're taking on when you have a couple people out there, not just one, it is double the effort. So it was really trying to be pretty practical about where are those areas that we are not maybe where we should be compared to our peers. What do we need to do to get there? And there were certainly enough of those kinds of things that we could address with the institution support that weren't major impacts, I guess, from a budget standpoint. They certainly impacted, and we needed the support, but it wasn't at the levels that might make people more nervous, to your point. And I think having more that big picture view and that visionary focus that you need to when you get in the chair and now you're the athletic director, that's where a lot of the time you're spending is. A lot of people wonder what the heck you do all day. And a lot of it is strategically needing to think about what we need to be doing and then figure out ways to get there. So the coaching support was big, the starting the fundraising that we had not had before, so starting Friends of Maroon Athletics, just getting some kind of giving going to us so we could begin to do some things for ourselves that we didn't need the university support. Making some changes in some of our conference alignment where a couple sports just didn't really work within the UAA to put them in a better competitive spot. And I think doing things to really raise awareness of who we were and our identity on campus. So making our athletic community feel more unified, and that was through getting apparel deal that we were able to do for 5 years, getting everybody to kind of look the same, re-enlivening our logos, and just that identity itself, bringing our community together as a whole, but then also giving that identity and visibility on campus has been huge in just, raising that level of profile. And I think people feeling more proud of their affiliation with us and what we do. So we have steps to take further, but I think, it was fairly simple things of just giving this a fresh look, listening, and trying to knock away at those things that we could actually help ourselves in doing were the keys. Yeah.
Awesome. It's been said that you take a job for your next job, meaning that you're probably not going to be in the role that you're in for the rest of your career. What are these experiences setting you up for in the future in terms of in athletics, outside of athletics? What are some of the things that you may have thought about there as you think about opportunities that may arise because it is a business, higher education and athletics, that have people that move into great opportunities?
I guess it goes back to even what we were talking about before with the philosophical alignment. Agreed. I feel like I'm early enough in my career, probably not my last move. It could be. It's a great place. And I knew, though, looking forward, that it would be very similar kind of places that I would position myself to move on from there for, as really I had previously while I was at Princeton, except that now I'll have the experience of being an athletic director. So I didn't feel I was closing any doors that I would want open to me, whether that was at a Division I or a Division III institution. I think the same kinds of places would be what I'm looking at to do moving forward as I would have been coming out of Princeton, except now I feel like I'm better positioned because I've been an athletic director and I have that experience. So that was my thought process, is I didn't feel like I was hurting myself, even though there's a bit of maybe discomfort with hiring a Division III athletic director at a Division I school. But I thought for the kinds of Division I schools that I really would be interested in, that wouldn't be as much of a concern. And given my background at other places, that would, still be part of my experience. It doesn't go away. So it's, I didn't feel, I guess I just felt that this was just right in line with that potential. Outside of athletics is a whole other question, and that's an interesting one because I don't think it's one I really contemplated a whole lot before being at Chicago, but it's really interesting when you're at these kinds of places, as you know, you just end up meeting a lot of different people, and other kinds of opportunities start, presenting themselves in a way that makes you think a little bit outside the box maybe. And so I think it's just, I don't know that I'll necessarily ever move in that direction, but it's interesting given the kinds of people you come into contact with within our industry, but also just the kinds of people you're meeting because of institutions like Princeton, the University of Chicago, that make maybe some of those other opportunities more available.
Sure. Yeah.
Michael, for me, I look at it a little bit differently, and I agree. If you look at typically over the course of somebody's career, particularly in athletics, you're moving around quite a bit. It's become a pretty transient industry, and some compare that, I guess, to others that move around quite a bit, whether it's higher education or the military or whatever, and that's fun for the family, and it's also tough on the family. And so the way that Danny and I have looked at every move, again, the first gate that we try to walk through is, can we see ourselves here for the rest of our lives? Do we see our kids going to high school in this community? Can we see ourselves retiring in this community? If the answer to that is yes, I feel like we go into that kind of all in that particular community. And so we're not necessarily looking at this as an opportunity to position ourselves for what's next. I think that's really difficult, and there's some danger, and we've seen it happen before, where some folks might go to an institution and make decisions there that help them kind of get and lead to the next job. And I subscribe to the fact, and I think you do too, Erin, in that if we all kind of get in this thing and buy in together and great things happen here, we're all going to get out of it kind of what we're looking for. And that might be different for different people, personally or professionally. It could be fulfillment in that particular job. It could be upward movement within your university. It could be opportunities outside of athletics or at another institution. It could be other professional development things or personal fulfillment types of things. And so I'm not necessarily, Michael, thinking about this as how does it put me in a position down the road. Now, that said, I certainly think that it would. If for whatever reason, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, or whatever time frame that looks like, things change at St. Thomas or things change in the Esten family, and for whatever reason we want to look at something else, without a doubt, I think that the experiences that we have and the successes that I hope that we'll have and plan to have, and the growth mindset that we have at St. Thomas will position us for other opportunities. I don't know what that looks like, but that, it's certainly something you have to think about. I don't think that you're being fair to yourself or fair to your family if you don't think about how that's going to position you for something else in the future. Yeah.
So for a concluding question, you made the conscious decision to, move from Division I into Division III, move from being, somebody who's supporting to somebody who's leading. What advice would you have for somebody who is thinking about that similar opportunity and saying, this is an intriguing opening, this is an intriguing opportunity? What guidance would you give them as they go and jump into it? Again,
I'm very new in this particular position, and I'll say for us, it was just, again, being honest with ourselves. What is really important to us? What's perceived to be important, and what is really important? And so, as an example, at Minnesota and Berkeley and Penn State, there's some prestige to that, and prestige in the experiences, prestige with the institution, which is really, really important. Ultimately, for us, it's really about getting our hands on the mission and how do we get as close to that as we can and the impact that we can have on student athletes. And I'll argue that impact is every bit as strong at the Division III level or Division II level or Division I level. And so regardless of conference, regardless of level, those student athletes are leaving with an experience that's going to set them up differently for the rest of their lives than if they wouldn't have participated in intercollegiate athletics. And so having that conversation around those experiences beyond the impact was important for us. And so really being honest with ourselves around what's important, I think, is what led us to a place where we felt really comfortable in making this decision. And so I'd say, the advice that I would say is talk to as many people as you can, try to gather as much information as you can, but be honest with yourself, because if you're not and you get there and it's actually not what you intended it to be, you're going to be unhappy and you're not going to be doing any kind of service to the institution. And if you are honest with yourself, it might keep you from making that decision. So I think that's it sounds simple, but I think that's an important piece of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think certainly having that alignment, as we've been talking about, having this shared core values is very important. So don't make the move just to make the move, or because you so badly, for whatever reason, want to be an athletic director. Like, remember why you got into this, why you do this, what is your core purpose and mission, and make sure that's aligned with the institution's core purpose and mission. I'd also say don't short the importance of the experience and the journey along the way and the preparation for going into this. Give yourself enough time to really feel comfortable in your skin, because, as you will find out quickly if you haven't already, as you have found out, it is very easy for everyone to sit back in judgment and critique every decision that's made, whether it's alumni, parents, people in the department, student athletes. And so being comfortable in your skin, knowing that you're making decisions with your best judgment based on that experience. And I'm not saying this is, a terrible livelihood at all. But I think when there's not that complete, comfortable feeling of who you are as a person, as a leader, it's a lot tougher job, because it's a tough job anyway. It's a great job, but it's a tough job because, you remember when you may have been one of those people who criticized what was going on. It's a lot easier to do that than to actually be the one in it making those decisions, and just know that it's fun to be able to do it. I like to be the one that has the final say, but I do it in a very informed way and with guidance and advice. But I think being very comfortable in that is really important before going.
Fantastic. Well, Erin, Phil, thank you very much for your candor and your insights and sharing your story and your journey. And I'm sure the people who are watching the video will find it very informative and insightful for the decisions they're trying to make. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.